The voice came from inside the cedar chest. I was standing in a stranger's attic on a Tuesday afternoon in November, holding a casserole dish my daughter had left behind, when I heard it. Small, muffled, terrified. Grandpa. I have been many things in my 63 years. A husband for 31 of them. A father since I was 27. A grandfather for the last 7. I have never moved faster than I did in that moment, crossing that attic in 4 steps, grabbing the latch on that old cedar chest against the far wall. It wasn't locked, just a heavy lid and a simple metal clasp that small fingers couldn't lift from the inside. I threw it open. My granddaughter Annie was curled at the bottom, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself, cheeks streaked with tears and cedar dust. She blinked up at me in the sudden light, and for one terrible second, she didn't recognize me. Her eyes were the eyes of an animal that has been in the dark too long. "Grandpa?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I've got you. Come here, sweetheart. I've got you." I lifted her out. She weighed almost nothing. All 62 pounds of her pressed against my chest like she was trying to disappear into me. She was shaking. Not from cold, the chest was not cold, but from something worse. From the particular trembling of a child who has learned to be afraid in a place that was supposed to be safe. "How long have you been in there, Annie?" She thought about it. Her face scrunched the way it does when she's doing math in her head. "Since after lunch," she said. "Grandma Gloria put me in." I knocked over my milk at the table. "I didn't mean to, Grandpa. I was trying to reach the butter, and I didn't mean to." I held her tighter. I didn't trust myself to speak for a moment. When I could, I said, "Where is Grandma Gloria right now? Watching her shows downstairs? She said I had to stay until I learned to be more careful." I started walking toward the attic stairs with Annie still in my arms. I was 3 steps from the door when she said it. "Grandpa, wait." Something in her voice stopped me. Not the words, the tone. Careful, deliberate. The voice of a child choosing words the way you choose steps on ice. I turned. She was looking past me, back toward the far end of the attic. There was a door there, low and narrow, set into the slanted wall where the roof line dropped down. Padlocked. The kind of padlock you'd see on a storage unit, heavy and industrial, completely out of place on an interior door in a private home. "Don't open that one." "What's in there, Annie?" She pressed her face into my shoulder. "Grandma Gloria says that's where the ones who don't listen end up. The ones who go in don't come back. The ones who go in don't come back." I stood there in that attic for a long moment, looking at that padlock, at the dust thick around the door frame, at the thin line of darkness at the bottom of the door. Undisturbed. Long undisturbed. I carried Annie downstairs. I took her to my car, started the engine, put the heat on. I locked the doors and told her not to open them for anyone but me. She nodded, still trembling, and I watched her face through the rear window as I walked back toward the house. "Gloria Mercer, my former mother-in-law, no. Wrong family. Let me be clear about who Gloria Hartwell is. Gloria is the mother of my daughter's ex-husband, Derek. When Melissa and Derek got married 12 years ago, I shook Gloria's hand and thought she seemed reserved, formal, the kind of woman who keeps a spotless house and smiles with her mouth only. Over the years, I revised that assessment several times, each time in the wrong direction. Derek and Melissa divorced 14 months ago. Their marriage had been deteriorating for years, quietly, the way foundations crack before anything shows on the surface. No dramatic scenes. Just distance and silence and a version of Melissa I barely recognized when I'd call on Sunday evenings. She came back to herself slowly after the divorce, like watching someone surface from deep water. Annie stayed with Gloria on Tuesdays and Thursdays while Melissa worked. That had been the arrangement since before the divorce, and the family court mediator saw no reason to change it. Gloria presented well. Clean home, good references, attentive grandmother. No red flags in the record. I had come that Tuesday not to pick Annie up early, exactly, but because Melissa had forgotten the casserole dish she'd left there weeks ago and asked if I could grab it on my way home from the hardware store. I hadn't called ahead. I didn't think I needed to. Gloria opened the front door when I knocked. She looked at me, then passed me at my car in the driveway, and something moved behind her eyes. Not guilt. Not quite. More like calculation. "Carl, I didn't know you were coming by." "Annie's in my car," I said. "I'm taking her home." The calculation intensified. Melissa didn't say anything about Gloria. I kept my voice flat and even. I have been a principal for 22 years. I know how to speak to people who are used to controlling a room. I know how to take that away from them quietly. I said, "Annie told me you put her in the cedar chest in the attic. As a punishment." Her face didn't change. "That's discipline. Children need structure and consequences. She's 7 years old." She knocked over a glass of milk. Children who are careless need to learn that carelessness has costs. I looked at this woman standing in her doorway, this 67-year-old grandmother with her neat gray hair and her embroidered cardigan, and I felt something I had not felt since the day I found out my own father had been cheating on my mother for 9 years. That specific nausea of realizing the world is shaped differently than you thought. I called Melissa from the driveway. I told her what I had found. The silence on the line was the silence of a woman processing something she didn't want to be true. Then I called 911. The police arrived in 9 minutes. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both younger than my daughter. Gloria met them at the door with the same composed face she had shown me. She had had 9 minutes to compose it further. But Annie was in my car, wrapped in my jacket, and Annie talked to the female officer through the window with the careful honesty of a child who doesn't yet know she's supposed to lie for grown-ups. The officers asked about the attic. About the padlocked door. Gloria said it was a storage room. Old things, family items. The officers asked if she had a key. She said she had lost it years ago. One of the officers, the younger male one, looked at me. I looked at him. He looked back at the house. "We're going to need to take a look in that attic, ma'am. What they found behind that padlocked door is not something I can describe cleanly. I was not in the attic when they opened it. I was in my car with Annie, and then I was at the hospital with Annie, and I learned what was there the same way I learned most of the important things in my life. Too late, and all at once." Detective Carla Reyes came to the hospital at 9 that evening. 50 years old, short gray locks. The kind of tired that isn't from one long day but from 10,000 long days accumulated. She sat down across from me in the family waiting area outside the room where Annie was being examined, and she told me that they had found human remains behind the door in the attic. The remains of a child. A girl. Approximately 7 to 9 years of age at the time of death. Wrapped in canvas and placed inside a wooden trunk that had been sealed against the inner wall. The preliminary assessment estimated she had been there for a long time. The detective used the word decades. I looked at my hands on my knees. I could hear Annie talking to a nurse behind the closed door, asking if the nurse liked dinosaurs. The nurse said she did. Annie said the Triceratops was underrated, and people were always too obsessed with the T-Rex. My granddaughter. 62 pounds of life and opinions and a future that almost ended in a cedar chest because she knocked over a glass of milk. "What do you know about Gloria Hartwell's family?" the detective asked me. "Not much," I said. Derek, her son, Melissa's ex-husband. As far as I know, she had just the one child. She never talked about a husband, said he left when Derek was young. Detective Reyes was quiet for a moment. She opened a folder on her lap. Records show that Gloria Hartwell had 2 children. Derek, born 1978, and a daughter, Naomi, born 1975, reported missing in June 1987. She was 9 years old. I understood before she finished the sentence. The math was already doing itself in my head. 38 years ago, you think the remains are Naomi. We'll need to confirm through dental records. But the age, the time frame, the location. Yes, that is what we believe. I thought about the padlock. Industrial grade, heavy, completely mismatched to that low door under the roofline. I thought about the dust around the frame, the undisturbed quality of it, the way it had clearly not been opened in a very long time. I thought about a 9-year-old girl in 1987 who was reported missing and never found. Where is Gloria now? In custody. She was arrested at the house. She has not said a word. Asked for a lawyer immediately, and hasn't spoken since. And Derek. Does he know? We're in contact with him. He's coming in tomorrow morning. I sat with that for a moment. Derek Hartwell, my daughter's ex-husband. The man who had, to my honest assessment, made my daughter quietly miserable for a decade. Not in obvious ways. Not in ways you could point to cleanly. Just a persistent erosion, the way water takes a shoreline. I had never liked him, but I had also never thought he was dangerous. More neglectful than cruel. More absent than present. Did Derek know about his sister? The detective said, "That is one of the things we need to find out." Annie was released from the hospital at 11 with a clean bill of physical health. No hypothermia, no significant injury. The doctor was careful and thorough and spoke to Annie directly, which I appreciated. He said she was a resilient kid. He said that like it was a compliment. I suppose it was. I didn't feel like accepting it on her behalf. We drove to Melissa's apartment. I had called her from the hospital, and she was waiting at the door when we pulled up, still in her work clothes, her face showing everything she was trying not to show. When Annie saw her, she climbed out of the back seat and walked up the porch steps with the measured dignity of a child who has decided not to cry until she's somewhere safe. She made it to the doorway before the tears came. Melissa caught her and held her and looked at me over Annie's head with an expression I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice was the voice of someone swallowing something jagged. I swear I didn't know she was doing that. I know. She watched Annie every Tuesday and Thursday for 2 years. If I had known, Melissa. I went up the steps and put my hand on her shoulder. I know. We put Annie to bed together. It took a while. She wanted both of us in the room. She wanted the lamp on, not just the nightlight. She wanted to tell me about the Triceratops again, in more detail, and I let her talk until the words started slurring, and her eyes closed and her breathing evened out into something that sounded, finally, like peace. In the kitchen afterward, over coffee neither of us was drinking, Melissa told me what she knew about Naomi. Not much. Derek had never wanted to talk about it. She died when Derek was 9, he'd said once. Early in their relationship, when Melissa had asked. Some kind of accident. His mother never recovered. We don't talk about it. She died when Derek was 9. He would have been old enough to remember. Old enough to know what an accident looked like versus something else. He had been in that house. He had grown up in that house, wherever they had lived in 1987, with his mother and his sister and the particular silences that accumulate in families where bad things happen and no one asks questions. Did he know? I asked. Melissa wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. I think he knew something, she said carefully. He used to have nightmares. For years. He'd wake up sweating, wouldn't tell me what they were about. And he never once pushed back when his mother crossed a line with Annie. Never. I'd tell him his mother was too hard on her, too strict, and he would just look at me like I was speaking a language he didn't understand. Like the concept of pushing back on his mother was simply not available to him. The dental records confirmed it on Friday. The remains in the attic belonged to Naomi Hartwell, 9 years old at the time of death. Missing since the 14th of June, 1987. The medical examiner determined cause of death as asphyxiation. The examiner's report included the phrase, consistent with confinement in an enclosed space. Naomi Hartwell had been locked somewhere and not let out. The police found Gloria's journals during a search of her bedroom. I did not read them. I saw excerpts in the courtroom months later, and that was more than enough. They were meticulous, clinical, the language of a woman who had constructed a complete private logic, a system in which children were not people but projects, and projects that failed were to be managed like defective materials. When they could not be corrected, they were removed. N was defiant again at breakfast, one entry read, from June of 1987. She knocked her bowl off the table deliberately. I explained the consequences clearly. She chose not to listen. After that, there was no more N. In the margin, in different ink, added later, D understands now what happens to children who do not listen. D will not make the same choice N made. Derek had grown up with that knowledge pressed into him like a brand. His sister had been wrong, and wrong children went away and did not come back. His mother had made sure he understood the mechanics of that lesson without ever naming them directly. He had spent 38 years carrying it in the form of nightmares he couldn't explain to his wife. He came to see me 2 weeks after the arrest. Knocked on my door on a Sunday morning, hat in hand, literally. I almost didn't let him in, but he looked like a man who had been taken apart and not yet put back together, and whatever I felt about our history, I opened the door. He sat at my kitchen table and told me that he had known something happened to Naomi, but that he had never known exactly what. That he had been 9 years old and his sister was there and then she wasn't, and his mother had told him Naomi had gone away because she was bad. And he had believed her the way 9-year-olds believe the people who control their entire world. He had spent his whole adult life running from that story, he said. Not looking at it, not asking about it. Building a life on top of it the way you build over a crack in the foundation, just pray the house doesn't settle. I listened. I didn't forgive him. Forgiveness wasn't mine to grant, and it wasn't the point of that morning anyway. But I listened, because he was also, in some broken and insufficient way, a person who had been shaped by something terrible before he was old enough to have a choice about it. He asked about Annie. I told him she was in therapy and doing better than I had dared hope. He asked if he could send her a card sometime. I told him I would have to ask Annie and ask Melissa. He nodded. He put his hat back on and he left, and I stood at the kitchen window and watched him walk to his car, and I thought about the particular arithmetic of damage, how one person's cruelty can multiply down through the generations. How it never really ends. It only changes shape. Gloria Hartwell was charged with second-degree murder in the death of Naomi Hartwell, child abuse, false imprisonment, and obstruction of justice spanning nearly 4 decades. Her defense attorney argued diminished capacity. The prosecution argued that 4 decades of sustained deception constituted the opposite of diminished capacity, that it represented methodical, deliberate criminality maintained over a lifetime. The jury agreed with the prosecution. She was sentenced to 30 years. She was 67. She would, in all likelihood, die in prison. Her face, when the verdict was read, showed nothing. Not relief, not anguish, not defiance. Just that same composed blankness I had first seen in her doorway when I told her I knew what she had done to Annie. A mask that had been worn so long, it had become the face itself. Annie started seeing a therapist named Dr. Marcus Webb the week after the hospital. He was soft-spoken and patient and had a collection of small wooden puzzles on his office shelf that Annie immediately cataloged and began working through methodically. They met twice a week at first, then weekly. Melissa and I took turns driving her. The nightmares were bad for the first month. She would wake up calling for me or for Melissa, and whoever was there would sit with her until the fear passed. She was afraid of small spaces for a while, couldn't be in an elevator without gripping a hand, couldn't close the bathroom door all the way, doctor. Webb said this was normal, that her nervous system had learned a lesson it would need time to unlearn, and that the presence of safe adults was the most important medicine. I made myself available. Retired principals have flexible schedules. I drove Annie to school on the days Melissa had early meetings. I picked her up on Thursdays now, just me, no one else. We got ice cream on the way home every single Thursday regardless of weather, which was Annie's condition and which I accepted without negotiation. The ice cream Thursdays became our thing. She would order something elaborate and eat most of it and then give me the last few bites because she knew I would be trying to stick to the diet my doctor had been recommending since my last checkup, and she thought watching me break it was funny. She was right. It was. It is now 14 months since that Tuesday in November. Annie is 8, 3rd grade. She has recently become very interested in birds, specifically migratory birds, and has informed me that her life goal is to be an ornithologist. She knows words I have to look up when she's not watching, so she doesn't catch me not knowing them. She had a rough 2 months in the spring when the nightmares returned for a while, but they faded again. Doctor. Webb says she is doing remarkably well. I am 64 now. I did not expect this chapter of my life to look like this. My wife passed 4 years ago, breast cancer. And since then it has been me and my daughter and my granddaughter and the slow work of rebuilding a life that makes sense without the person who anchored it. I thought retirement meant mornings with coffee in the paper and maybe taking up woodworking. Instead, it has meant school pickups and Thursday ice cream and sitting in waiting rooms while therapists teach my granddaughter to trust the world again. I would not trade it. Melissa has started seeing someone, a man she met through a friend, steady and kind, who brings her flowers and does not make her feel like she is shrinking. I like him. More importantly, Annie likes him, which is the only metric that matters in our family. Derek was not charged with any crime. The investigation found no evidence that he had direct knowledge of what happened to Naomi beyond the information a 9-year-old would have had. He has been in therapy. I know this because he told me when he came by that Sunday and because Melissa mentioned it once, carefully. The way you mention things you're not sure how to categorize. I don't know what he makes of everything. I don't know how you integrate the knowledge that your mother killed your sister and that you spent 38 years not looking directly at it. I suspect that is the kind of thing that takes a very long time to integrate, if it ever fully does. Naomi Hartwell was buried in a small ceremony in February, the town she had grown up in. There was no family to speak for her, not really. The detective who had handled the case attended. A few people who had been children in that neighborhood in 1987 and still remembered her. A teacher who had been young then and was old now, and who cried quietly through the whole service. Annie asked if we could go. I asked her why. She thought about it for a long time in the way she thinks about important things, sitting very still with her head slightly tilted. She was alone for a really long time, Grandpa, in that attic, above everyone, and no one knew. So we went. Melissa came too. It was cold and clear, one of those February mornings that feels like the weather is being honest with you. The headstone was simple. Naomi Claire Hartwell, 1978 to 1987. Beloved daughter. The last 2 words felt wrong given everything, but there was no one to choose different ones. Annie stood in front of the headstone for a while without speaking. Then she said, talking to the stone the way children talk to things directly when they mean it. Hi, Naomi. I'm Annie. I didn't know you, but I know what it's like to be in a dark place and not know if anyone is coming. My grandpa came for me. I'm sorry nobody came for you sooner. But we're here now. You're not alone anymore. She took a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket. She had drawn a picture the night before, at the kitchen table, while I made dinner. A triceratops standing in a field. She had colored it carefully, staying inside the lines, which she doesn't always bother to do. She placed it against the base of the headstone and weighted it with a small stone so the wind wouldn't take it. Can we get hot chocolate on the way home, Grandpa? We can get whatever you want. We walked back to the car across the frozen grass, the 3 of us, and I held Annie's hand and thought about how much can be hidden in a life. How much can live in the walls of ordinary houses, in the ordinary spaces of ordinary families? For decades and decades, while the world outside moves on and people mow their lawns and take out their garbage and do not look too closely, I have been a school principal. I have been trained to see the signs of children in distress. I know the research on childhood trauma. I know the warning signs. And I did not see what was happening to my granddaughter in that house every Tuesday and Thursday for 2 years, because I trusted an arrangement that seemed reasonable and proper and presented well. I think about that. I will probably always think about it. Annie had been having bad dreams for 3 months before that Tuesday. I knew that. Melissa knew that. We thought it was adjustment to the divorce, the disruption of her routine, the ordinary grief of a child whose family had changed shape. We talked to her pediatrician. The pediatrician said children often have sleep disruptions during family transitions. We nodded and took that answer home and lived with it. She had been asking to stay home on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She said she didn't feel good. She said she didn't like Grandma Gloria's house. We told her it was important to respect the schedule, that Grandma Gloria loved her, that feeling nervous sometimes was normal. She had been trying to tell us. In every way available to a 7-year-old, she had been trying to tell us. And we had been fluent in the language of reasonable explanations and had not stopped to learn the language she was actually speaking. If you are watching this, I need you to hear something important. I have been alive for 64 years, and I have learned most of my lessons the hard way, and this is the one I most wish I had learned earlier. When a child keeps finding reasons not to go somewhere, listen. When a child's behavior changes around a specific person, listen. When a child who was easy and open starts getting quiet and careful, listen. Not to the explanation that is easiest. To the child. I almost lost Annie to a casserole dish and an open afternoon, and the fact that I didn't call ahead. She saved herself by whimpering loud enough for a grandfather with 63-year-old ears and creaky knees to hear across an attic. Not every child gets that moment. Not every child has someone in the driveway at the right time. Be in the driveway. Pay attention. Believe them when they try to tell you. Annie is in the backyard right now. I can see her through the kitchen window. She has a pair of cheap binoculars she got for her birthday, and she is standing very still in the middle of the yard, looking up at the oak tree in the corner with the focused patience of a scientist. She has been watching a pair of mourning doves who have taken up residence in the branches. She has named them. The male is Gerald. The female is Dr. Patricia Webb, which she chose because she thinks it's funny to name animals after her therapist. Dr. Webb, for the record, was very honored. 8 years old. Dinosaur shirts and scientific patience and an opinion on every bird she has ever encountered. My granddaughter. Alive and healing and absolutely convinced that Gerald the mourning dove is, quote, doing his best. So is she. So are we all. That is what I have learned from the worst year of my life. That survival is not a single moment. It is a practice. It is driving to the ice cream place on a cold Thursday and sitting across from your granddaughter while she describes the aerodynamic advantages of the Triceratops skull and eating the last 3 bites of her sundae, even though your doctor will have opinions about it. It is showing up, again and again, in whatever form showing up takes that day. It is being the person in the driveway. It is opening the chest. If this story found you, share it with someone who works with children. Someone who might be explaining away what they should be listening to. You might not be able to change everything, but you might be in exactly the right driveway at exactly the right time. That matters. It matters more than you know.